think about what's going on when you're listening to a book. Maybe your life's not quite where you want it to be right now. Maybe you've got worries. Being vision impaired is tough. I've talked to completely blind patrons who live in a trailer by themselves. Now switch on that machine and you're listening to Dostoevsky. You're listening to the latest book about politics or romance by Daniel Steele. Whatever makes your world in that moment different. It can be escapism, right? I mean, we push healthy escapism.
Hi, folks. I'm Charlotte Jusinski, and this is Encounter Culture, a podcast from the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. Escapism. We all do it. Perhaps some of us more than others, and maybe the methods some folks use are a bit more conventional than others. There's travel, there's food, there are movies and painting and cartoons. But of course, all of those things tend to have at least some startup cost. But the one form of escapism that pretty much anyone can practice, regardless of income, is reading. Books are one of the oldest forms of escapism in the books. And as you'll hear Tim Donahue say on this podcast, they're perhaps the healthiest form as well. You might be thinking, but Charlotte, not everyone can enjoy a book. And that's absolutely true. There are a number of roadblocks that could potentially prevent someone from reading the written word. But thankfully for New Mexicans, the dedicated staff at the New Mexico Library for the Blind and Print Disabled are working to dismantle those roadblocks one by one every day. In this episode, we'll meet the aforementioned Tim Donahue, Reader Services and Outreach Librarian, and Berdina Nieto, Reader Advisor, both of whom work at the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, part of the New Mexico State Library. Learn more about what services the library offers, why it's not necessarily easier to use an app for that, and what they love about Santa Fe. By the way, you'll hear an interjection toward the end of this episode from one of our producers, Alex Riegler. Alex and Andrea Klunder are from the Creative Imposter Studios, the production magicians behind why this podcast sounds so good. They sit in on every single recording session and often ask questions like the one you'll hear later, prompting fascinating answers from our guests. I'm so glad Alex's voice got to feature here, as she and Andrea do all the heavy lifting when it comes to making Encounter Culture what it is. So many thanks to them, and please enjoy.
I'm Berdina Nieto, and I'm a reader advisor for the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled.
I'm Tim Donahue, and I'm the Reader Services and Outreach Librarian.
I help our patrons pick up books, send them books through the mail, and the people we serve have disabilities like blindness, visual impairment, physical disabilities, and reading disabilities. I am from Santo Domingo Pueblo. I've been a reader advisor for the past 4 years. I currently live in Santa Fe, and before I worked with the library, I was in finances, so this library has been one of the best things I've ever done.
What made you see this position and say, like, oh yeah, that's a thing I'll do? Like, going from like a finance admin or finances to library for the blind seems like a big jump. Like, was there a particular draw for this thing?
Well, I'm a reader too. I love books, and finances wasn't as people-friendly as I would have liked it to be. I'm a very caring person. So I decided that it was time for me to just move on to something else, something different. So when I saw that this position was open, I thought to myself, well, why not give it a shot? Like, I don't know anything about it. It'd be nice to just jump into something new and different and learn on the go. Just meeting like all of these new people all over New Mexico, it makes me feel like I have family everywhere in the state. And that's what I enjoyed the most about it.
Nice. That's fabulous. So, Tim, you're up.
How did I get here? Who am I? Well, let me start with becoming a librarian. That was about 20 years ago. I had some web design experience and some teaching experience and a master's degree, but I still hadn't grown up, or it was.
It's overrated anyway.
But it turned out that libraries like people with some of my qualifications. So I became a librarian, traveled around a bit, New York, Montana, but got here 10 years ago simply because we had lived here before and we really missed Santa Fe. You can't leave Santa Fe.
No, it's true. I've tried. You can't do it.
Even if you leave it geographically, it's still in your heart. So we came back and I was looking for library jobs and I saw this position and I said, well, that's interesting. And it happened. So 7 years ago, I became a librarian for Reader Services and Outreach. And it's very important to me that what I do is a positive thing, that I see it as worthwhile, that it is about helping other people. That's why I'm in libraries. I love learning, knowledge, and fiction. So how great that I get to help people who otherwise might lose their enjoyment of reading. And of course, I'm like Berdina, I'm a reader, and I couldn't imagine losing that part of my life. So it keeps my battery charged.
In our preliminary emails that we were sending around, I kind of made this flippant comment of, what is this library? It's not just a big room full of Braille books. Clearly, there's so much more to it than I even know. So if you guys want to just kind of tag team the answer of what is the library for the blind and the print disabled, and what are some of the main things you offer and programs there that are available?
Just quickly, I want to put a plug in for Braille books. We do have them.
Okay.
We have a room full of them. It's called our reading room. And we have Braille, but we don't circulate our own Braille books because we have a partnership with the biggest Braille library in the country, which is Utah. It's part of the Utah state government. So we contract with them so New Mexico patrons can enjoy their services.
A lot of our patrons will often request Braille regularly. So if they need regular Braille, then Utah will serve them directly, where patrons can contact them to order the Braille. Or if a patron's not really wanting to use the Braille service that much, then we can check it out as interlibrary loan for them. But primarily, we work with audiobooks. So the audiobooks are put onto a special format cartridges. Our patrons are really comfortable calling them tapes, so I'll refer to them as digital tapes. And these digital tapes, they're customizable. We can put anywhere from 1 book to 25 books in different genres. A lot of patrons like to order series on one tape, or they can order a certain genre, a certain author. And each of these patrons will also receive a player. This player is about the size of a hardback book. It's not super heavy, so it's easy for people to carry around with them. It has a handle, and it runs on battery charge as well. And the buttons themselves, they're different colored, they're different shapes, so whoever needs to use this player by feel, it's super easy for them to learn, especially since it comes with tutorial mode. All they do is turn it on, and whatever button they press, that button will tell them exactly what it does.
Nice. And maybe I'm simplifying this a little too much, but would it be easier for this, there's an app for that? Like getting everybody a player and getting everybody the tapes. Does it ever get difficult?
Well, we actually do have a mobile app.
Oh, there you go.
We have the Braille and audio reading download website, which is Bard Mobile. So any of our registered patrons can download this app, whether they have an iOS or Android device. Mm-hmm. And it also works on Amazon Fire tablets. So unlike things like Libby or other library apps, the registered patron can keep these downloads for as long as they're active in the service. So they don't have to finish reading it by a certain date. It can just live on their device forever.
Well, I was just thinking about technology and the fact that what patrons are actually receiving through the postal mail are actual physical cartridges with a USB connection that go into the machine. So technologically speaking, in terms of capability, that's a little behind of what's possible, right? Anyone with a phone could have an audio app and they can listen to books. There are lots of apps for this, and millions of people have used them. What's different with us is, first of all, there's no charges once you're a patron, but you get a physical machine. So many people with impairments, older people, vision impairments, hearing impairments, phones don't work for them. There's a digital divide, there are expenses, there's difficulties with vision, and our machine is really cool. Picture a black box with really colorful and tactile feeling buttons. So the idea is they're designed for someone who is completely blind and could feel it. They can be thrown downstairs. They're super strong made, and they're uniform. So there's a support network that can repair them, that can upgrade them. It's a federal government project. So think of the Apollo missions. Think of the Saturn 13 rocket, of what can be accomplished when there's federal momentum and support for something. And what the NLS did was create these machines. And if nothing else, all you have to do to keep this service going is to call us. You get your machine, you keep it charged, you get your books in the mail, and you let us know when you need more. So it's very self-sufficient. and controlled and supported. Whereas otherwise, it's maybe the wild, wild west if you use apps through your phone.
For sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I will jump in and say that the NLS does continuously develop the MAR mobile app. So it is accessible to people who use VoiceOver on their iOS devices and talk back with the Samsung devices. So it's easily navigatable just by your voice. So you can just tell Siri, play Bard, play this next book, skip to next chapter. It's intuitive, it's easy to use. There is that little bit of learning that people have to do, but technology is always evolving, so we all need to learn a little bit more.
We all have something to learn all the time, so that works perfectly. Yeah. What if somebody wants a book you don't have on audio?
Well, the National Library Service has actually helped us with that a lot. Before, we were just kind of typing in on our patron profiles what they're waiting on reading. So the NLS sent out a new website for us where we would just fill out a form stating what books our patrons are wanting. So if it's something that's older, that helps out a lot because a lot of patrons do request older books that were published like in the 80s, 70s, or even older than that we might not have for our program. So we just fill out this form, send it to the NLS, and they will check with other network libraries throughout the country to see if they're in production of recording it, to see if it's on the list of books needing to be recorded, or if they're in the process of purchasing that book from commercial recordings. We do have a partnership with the New Mexico State Library's Books by Mail program as well. So any of our patrons who would also prefer getting large print books can receive them in the mail through that program as well.
Yeah, because as you know, the name implies, it's not only for the blind, but also print disabled. What does print disabled mean?
Well, it includes blindness, because if you're blind, you're going to not be able to read print. But there's a spectrum of sightedness. And so to qualify for our program, other conditions such as glaucoma, macular degeneration can also qualify. I don't know about right now, but in the past, we've had some veterans who have had their hands blown off. Mm-hmm. They can't hold a book. They have perfect vision, but they can't hold a book. They qualify. Recently, there's been a major change in what we call reading condition or reading impairments. One big word that's very cumbersome and hard to define is dyslexia. And there was a bit of some barriers qualifying for our program. If you were dyslexic, you needed a certifying authority, a doctor, MD, or DO, to sign off on dyslexia, which they're sometimes hesitant to do anyway because the definition is so disagreed upon. But they've opened the door to allow social workers, librarians, anybody to certify individuals for reading disabilities. This has the potential to greatly increase nationally the number of patrons that could have access to the program. So it's about reading. Can you read just fine? Maybe you don't need us. Do you have some troubles reading printed materials? You might qualify.
Wow.
Yeah, in short, anyone who is unable to read a standard printed book can qualify for our program. And like Tim mentioned, they do need a certifying authority, and that list has grown. So we always ask people to check out our website, or we also have a short list on the application that people need to send in to us to see who they can go to. They can just visit their local librarian and say, hey, I cannot read the books in your library. Will you help me go to this library?
That's awesome, especially the librarians part. It makes total sense. I mean, librarians are acutely aware of how exactly you read and what you need to read. And if someone's like, well, I don't have what I need to read.
Nobody wants you to be able to read more and enjoy it than a librarian.
That's very true.
One thing that doesn't always come out when I give interviews or we talk technically about the service is what's really happening. What's really happening are there thousands of people, many right now, listening to amazing literature. And when you think about 100,000 and more books that we have available and all the genres and topics, fiction, nonfiction, and the languages, that's where the color of this program really is.
It feels kind of utopian to think of this like blanket of literature over absolutely everybody.
That's a great word, utopian, because think about what's going on when you're listening to a book. Maybe your life's not quite where you want it to be right now. Maybe you've got worries. being vision impaired is tough. A lot of our patrons, I would say most, are pretty advanced in age. Some are financially struggling. I've talked to completely blind patrons who live in a trailer by themselves. So now switch on that machine and you're listening to Dostoevsky. You're listening to the latest book about politics or romance by Daniel Steele. Whatever makes your world in that moment different. It can be escapism, right? I mean, we push healthy escapism. And so what we are when we're working is these utopian experiences that people can have with good literature. Or not so good literature.
Yeah, even not so great literature can serve exactly that.
To kind of go into that as well, as far as providing escapism, we have a recording studio of our own where our volunteer readers will make digital books from books about New Mexico, because a lot of our patrons are also super into the area they live, the state. We've actually produced a few books by people who are patrons themselves.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so it gives me so much enjoyment to hear a patron go, hey, I wrote a book. Will you record it for me so everyone else can read it? Because once we do the recording, we can upload it to Bard, and not only does it reach the patrons in our state, it can reach nationwide.
That's really cool.
Our sound booth is really cool. It's mostly designed for one person to narrate from a book. And like Berdina said, our narrators, who are local volunteers, some retired actors, some retired librarians, people with really great voices and reading ability, they focus on Southwestern literature and New Mexico interest. But then that is shared with the rest of the country. So last Friday, our New Mexico poet laureate, Lauren Camp, was in there recording from her most recent book of poetry.
That's wonderful.
So now some who may not experience that poetry can now listen to it through our program everywhere, all 50 states.
We have talked a little bit about your methods of getting materials to people, which is really, user-friendly because it's either mail-based or app-based, which can be anywhere. But are there any challenges to there being one library for one entire state? The sheer geographical area is difficult. Are there any other challenges about serving such a large area and a large population?
Well, I could start by inserting the U.S. Postal Service. So it's a collaboration, right, between state government, federal government, and the Federal Postal Service. So they get our books to our patrons, sometimes even quickly. But in the corners of the state, it can be 5 days, even with the postal mail, because it gets a little quirky out there. And so we become aware of what books are going to get to people in maybe 2 days, what's going to take a little longer, and we converse with them on the status of current postal goings-ons. Because if there's, say, a government shutdown, if there's a supply chain issue, if it's the holidays, this all affects when our patrons may receive materials. So we constantly have to react to that. But at least they take care of it for us. So
we're so grateful to the postal workers. I mean, and then if we do run into any issues, anytime we call, they're more than willing to go, I'll fix that for you. It's taken care of.
I love the USPS. For a number of jobs now, I've dealt very closely with them. So I just shout out to the USPS. I'm a big fan.
So are we.
Hopefully somebody from there hears this and knows how grateful I am.
And then another challenge is kind of just getting the word out to all corners of the state. We do have a Facebook group for underneath the New Mexico State Library. So it's just a matter of trying to get the word out, trying to tell doctors and other people that can serve the community how they can reach our program.
And we know there's many out there who would benefit and enjoy it and aren't our patrons, many because they don't know about the program. So as outreach librarian, that's one of my challenges. How do you make people aware? And this state is really large in terms of, Here we are in Santa Fe, but there's just so many different areas, places, cultures, and to let people know that we're here is a constant challenge.
On that same topic, we kind of refer to all corners of the state, and I was picturing the map in my head, and it actually is like, wow, the corners actually are kind of the 4 places in the state that can be, most difficult to get to in some ways. And then that made me think of internet access and even mail access, like on the Navajo reservation and in some pueblos and in some rural areas like down in the Permian Basin and stuff like that can be more difficult to deal with than it is in Santa Fe or Albuquerque or Las Cruces or even smaller cities. Are there particular outreach efforts for the Pueblos and the Navajo reservation, or does the whole state kind of get the same, like, we want to get this to you treatment?
I wouldn't say particular, and it's difficult to do direct outreach, but we certainly have that in mind when we think of regions. When we talk to our public libraries, one of our major ways of reaching further, say, than, here we are in Santa Fe in the center, so to speak, at the Capitol, is that there's close to 125 public libraries. So because we're the state library, we can work closely with these regional libraries, many who serve those populations. So reaching out through them is often the best way. We do mail outs with our information, applications, promotional materials. So they go out there, go to conferences, so people know we're here. So we keep up our partnerships and rely to some degree on those partnerships to get the word out, like National Federation for the Blind and other agencies that look out for the same population we do.
Yeah, like the New Mexico State Library bookmobiles, they all carry their own stack of applications for our library, and they're well aware of how our program works. So since they're going out to these rural communities, that's how the public is a little bit more aware that, I can get services this way. And we're more than happy to just go to the bookmobiles and say, can you deliver this to this person on this route? And they're happy to do it.
Wow, that's like door-to-door service. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So we started our conversation talking a little bit about Braille, and then we moved into audiobooks, which, as you've mentioned, is the majority of, what patrons partake in. But I do want to learn a little bit more about the Braille offerings. In particular, have requests for Braille declined as audio options have become bigger and better and more plentiful?
There's a lot of different variables with Braille. There's the New Mexico School for the Blind. They do teach Braille at a young age. And then if blindness happens later on in life, then you absolutely can learn Braille as well. There's several different programs that are happy to teach you how to use Braille. So it's actually really hard to say if Braille requests have declined because everyone is in a different part of life. So whether they're young, they have Braille from school, or if they just became blind, then there's other programs that they can learn Braille from. It's just that audio is much easier to access, but I wouldn't say that it's contributing to the decline of learning Braille, or if there is a decline at all. We did receive a letter from a patron stating how happy they were that we offered audio services because as he's becoming older, it's very hard for him to learn a new skill such as Braille. Even though he is trying, he's learning a little bit, and he does want to request Braille once he's more comfortable with it, but he's very happy that audio is available.
Mm-hmm.
For many, it's a question of self-reliance. They want to be able to read. We define the term read broadly. So our patrons, when they're listening, they're reading. But many think reading themselves is doing it themselves, not with the benefit of an audio device. So there's a lot of self-determination to be Braille literate. But I do know that we're down to 40-ish Braille subscribers of our 2,000 patrons. So that's a low percentage, but there's many more that aren't subscribing to our Braille that do read Braille because there are now many devices that will create Braille on the fly. In other words, I don't know the technology exactly, but they can create a tactile experience as the book goes along.
So the way it works, the NLS actually has what they call an e-reader for eBraille. And eBraille is also available on BARD as well to download. So what this device does, like Tim says, it does have little raised bumps, but the bumps, they come up and down themselves right from underneath the cells. They're called cells. So when you're reading the letter A, it'll have the symbol for A come up from underneath the cell itself. So it does switch over whenever the patron tells it to. So when they're done with one line, they just press a button and then they move their finger over again, just like they're reading a Braille book.
Changing topics, but I don't want to forget to ask this. For about a year and a half when I lived back in New Jersey, I worked at the Seeing Eye. I worked with the dogs, but the campus was a really awesome place. So I often hung out with the blind students who were learning to communicate with their guide dogs. And one thing that I learned from working with blind folks is I will never not push in my chair. No matter what I do, I always push in my chair because that was one of the number one rules of working at the Seeing Eye, is especially in the dining room. Is there anything about working in this library in particular that you've learned has just kind of come from an awareness of the folks around you and what their needs might be?
Yeah, working with my patrons, it's taught me to be more observant and caring to just people in general, because we don't know what disabilities they might have. And I find myself observing buildings before I walk in to see if there's any obvious accessible entrances. Because if it's not obvious to me, how is it obvious to someone with a disability? Or like if I'm out shopping and I notice that there's a product on the floor, I pick it up myself. Because not only is it nice to make the area you're in clean, but it also could help out someone else that you're not aware of. So it's little things like that, especially online too. Like if I'm on social media and I'm going to make a post with a photo, I make sure to include alternate text so that whoever's using a screen reader will know what I post.
I think that seeing people, and I'm trying to think of maybe what I wasn't aware of that I am now. I think seeing people think of blind people sometimes as one of the senses is missing, right? There's 5 perceptions, but sight is gone. But that doesn't tell the whole story, because it seems that people who can't see make up so much for not being able to see. So one time I'm on the phone with one of our regular patrons. I don't know if they're still regular, but for some time they were getting exclusively cooking books. We have lots of cooking books.
Nice.
And so they like to cook while they listen out loud to the recipes. This particular patron is legally blind, can't see at all. So if you think for a minute about that person in their kitchen, hearing, and they were very communicative with me and open, and we would talk a little each time they would order cooking books. And the question came up of safety and working with fire when you can't see.
And knives. I'm not good with knives as it is, yeah.
Right. And the patron volunteered at one point to me, and it just hit me the way they said it. Believe me, Tim, when you're blind, you know where an open flame is. And it dawned on me, of course you would, right? So instead of seeing it, you're feeling it. The heat is there. You're more cautious than a seeing person. You're maybe more aware of the knives you're handling, the food and the way it smells and feels. And I think that started a thought process in me about what it would be to lack sight in terms of what else becomes more pronounced.
So let's say someone has been listening to our conversation and is like, wow, I'm vision impaired in some way. I want to take part in these services. How would someone do that right now?
They can go online to nmstatelibrary.org/LBPD, and we have our application available for them to download, fill out electronically, and then email it to us, fax it to us, or they can print it out, fill it out, and send it by mail. All of the applications that we have available are ready to be sent back in the mail. And if they prefer to receive the physical application by mail, feel free to call us. Toll-free number is 1-800-456-5515.
And does the library make use of volunteers in any way? Or in what way can people support it if they don't necessarily need the services but love the idea?
Our volunteer program primarily works with the recording studio. So they'll be readers that narrate the books. There will be reviewers. Right now, we are currently looking to pick up the volunteer program again, just because it did dwindle a bit with the pandemic like everything else. But yeah, anyone that's interested in reviewing or feels like they're going to be a great narrator, they can just call our library. Again, the toll-free number, 1-800-456-5515. Or they can call the local number, which is 505 476-9770.
Branching off that a little bit, how does the library kind of learn and grow from the community? I mean, there's obviously the, hey, I want this book. Do you have this book? No. Okay, we'll do something about that. There's those kind of simple ways. Are there more kind of advanced or nuanced ways in which the library learns what its patrons want and need?
That's a great question. And I will say our patrons are not shy about giving us any kind of feedback.
Nice.
Like with the digital tapes, before there were multiple book tapes, they were only preloaded single cartridge tapes. And when we moved over to that during the pandemic, patrons were shocked by it. And the process of it became easier for us to do new things, like create labels that have the first 8 books on the tape, so it's easier for patrons to know which ones they're listening to, and also learning how to incorporate bookshelf mode, which is telling the player to skip between books rather than skipping between chapters. And then working on ways to fix the service from when the book leaves our library and gets into the post office's hands and to the patrons, because patrons will tell us if there's an interruption during the delivery.
Oh, I'm sure.
So we've become more mindful of how quickly we're doing the service, how customizable we're making it, and also we're all learning the fact that not one size fits all, which is pretty much in anything. So that's the thing that patrons are teaching us most, is to be mindful, to kind of think about how they're going to experience the service, how they're experiencing the world around them. And we do have a lot of interaction with the New Mexico Commission for the Blind. So we know a little bit more about who our patrons are meeting with. So our world's become much bigger than outside of ourselves.
Wonderful.
On the technical side, we can run database queries. If we want to know, say, how many veterans over the age of 80 are patrons of ours that reside in Rio Arriba County, then we can find that out. So we can get particulars, but the best way is that we talk to them constantly, especially Berdina. She spends the most hours on the phone with our patrons right now. But you learn a lot because, like Berdina said, they're not shy with feedback, and we love that.
Yeah.
I just love them in general. I get very attached to the regular callers.
I'm sure, yeah.
Our patrons are just some of the greatest people in the state. They're always so grateful. And while we were dealing with our own issues, like with the pandemic, or like if we're having a bad day, there's always someone who calls saying, thank you for sending the books. And sometimes that's all they call for, is just to thank us. Like one of our patrons will call us at like 3 a.m. and go, I just wanted to leave a voicemail and tell you guys, I love you guys. Thank you for providing this service. And we have such a great time with talking to people and just learning who they are. And the way that they make us feel, like I said in the beginning, that I feel like I have family all over New Mexico. That's the way our patrons are.
And they'll be open sometimes, and it's hard to hear some of the things they tell us. And many say, this is all I have. As in literally, they are alone in silence, and they only have the voice they're listening to on the box we provide them with. That can be sad, but sadder would be they don't even have that. I could share one more anecdote, which is kind of special to me. We take a lot of calls from our patrons. Some are just want the books. They get right off the phone. Others more conversant. You get a feel for who wants to talk, needs to talk, and how long to give them or how to handle it. But one of my favorite calls that I'll always remember, and I talked to these individuals a few times, but it's been a while, so I don't know if they're still our patrons. But there was a group of legally blind people who lived together, constructing music boxes. That's how they got paid. So they would like to listen to stories while they constructed music boxes together. And I got a call, and it was like a group call, because the one ordering books was talking to the other 3 people in the room, and they were discussing the literature they liked, what kind of stories they like to listen to while they work all day putting boxes together. And they really all liked most adventure stories. And so, I talked with them a while and found some really good, like we did some old school adventure like Robinson Crusoe, and they were really wanting just to hear page turners so they could focus. And the thought of that room, which I've never seen, and what goes on there all day, constructing music that then people can hear this beautiful thing, but they're listening to adventures to fill their mind while they use their incredible expert hands and tactile abilities, partly because they're blind. And I thought, well, this is a good job, because I'm sending adventure stories to blind people who can make music for other people. And so there's a story behind every book, and there's over 100,000, and every patron, and their life, and their cat on their lap while they're listening. And that keeps me going at this job, stories like that.
For more information about the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, or to get your application started, please visit nmstatelibrary.org/LBPD or call 800-456-5515 or 505-476-9770.
This has been Encounter Culture, a production of the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. Encounter Culture is produced and edited by Andrea Klunder at the Creative Imposter Studios, with additional production and editing from Alex Riegler and Helen King. Our technical director is Edwin R. Ruiz. Our recording engineer is Cabby at Cabby Sound Studios in Santa Fe. And our executive producer is Daniel Zillman. Thank you to New Mexico artist El Brujo de Santinava for our theme music. For a full transcript and show notes, visit podcast.nmculture.org or click the link in the episode description in your listening app. The New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs is your hub for the state's exceptional museums, historic sites, and cultural institutions. From native treasures to space exploration, world-class folk art to awesome dinosaurs, we celebrate the essence of New Mexico every day. I'm your host, Charlotte Jusinski. Thanks for listening.
Tim mentioned that you can't really leave Santa Fe because, your heart stays there. I'm just curious, as a not Santa Fe person, why is that?
Oh, God. How much time do you have?
It starts with how beautiful it is here. First of all, a lot of people aren't aware that New Mexico is a state. It's amazing. But even those who are aware it's a state think of desert or something. But we're up in the Rockies here in Santa Fe. We're at 7,000 feet. When you get up to this altitude, the light does something it just doesn't do in other places. You're closer to space. So on a clear day here, the sky is dark blue. You feel it in the oxygen level. I mean, there's no pollution here. It can't reach us, really. So the air quality and the light and the altitude is where it begins, but then it's just gorgeous.
Santa Fe's always just been dear to me because of the people. There's so much diversity here. Like, you can just walk downtown or just walk through anywhere and you'll meet a new interesting person because they're either visiting from here, they just moved here, they have different hobbies. And I'm going to say this, but I play Pokemon Go regularly.
Nice, as well you should.
And I have met so many interesting people that live here in Santa Fe. There's just so much to do here. Like, if you're very artistically inclined, the galleries are beautiful. The museums around are great. And then I will mention the food, because you can just kind of point in any direction and say, I'll go to that restaurant, walk to the restaurant, notice there's another restaurant right there, and then you got to flip a coin.
Yeah.
But it's just good people, good food, good art, good everything. Like, it just makes you feel at home. And I feel like that's what I've heard everyone else say. This feels like home because everybody's so friendly.